You better get a master's degree and move on. So I went back and entered the counseling program, high school counseling. And that's where I met my wife on the first day in an abnormal psychology class. and I always sat in the front row, and she sat in the back row. And I looked up there and I saw her up there. And I thought that she was the roommate of a gal that I had dated up in Traverse City. And she thought that I was the roommate of a guy that she had dated earlier. So we came together to say hello to one another. Realized we didn't know each other. And I said, well, how about a cup of coffee? That was the most expensive cup of coffee I ever had. My mother, who stayed out of all of my affairs with women, not affairs with women.
Relationships.
Hey, whatever works. That doesn't help. all of the girls that I ever dated, she never made a comment one way or the other until I met Judy. And my mother, who does not believe in astrology, told me that my stars were in ascension when I met my wife. So we got engaged in April, and August 22nd, 1964, we got married, had a quick honeymoon at the cottage, and immediately moved out here to California because we both had graduated in counseling, and in 1964, California was the mecca for counselors. I started with 250 kids, and that was good. You could learn them all. You could do positive stuff. When I retired in 2000, I had 635. All you could do then was just react to what was coming through the door. Okay, so August of 64, am I doing okay? August of 64, I pull into Tustin High School in the Tustin Unified School District, and I'm having lunch in the faculty lunchroom, and I hear the people in the next table saying, "Who in the hell has that Goldwater sticker on their car?" And I said, that would be me. So I was the odd man out, and the odd man out with the California Teachers Association for the rest of the time. Okay. So we move out here. Judy, you have to teach PE. You have to teach 2 years before you can become a counselor in California in those days. Judy was in PE and then went into counseling in the Newport district, and I was a teacher and then a counselor in the Tustin Unified School District, mainly up at Foothill High School. I had some difficulties as a counselor, and the problem you've already heard. The problem is that my life was charmed. And I had a difficult time at first relating to the kids that hated their mom and dad, and hated their siblings, and hated their teachers, and this type of thing. It took me a while to be able to work around that, but I managed it. One of the problems that I had in counseling was, I don't mean to be egotistic, but I was too truthful. I would have a situation where Susie needed to get into an algebra class, and she legitimately needed to get into that algebra class, and I would tell her, it's closed. I'm sorry, it's closed. I can't put you in there. Well, that became my problem. The mother thought it was my problem. The kid thought it was my problem. And then that problem was confounded with my principal, who had told me to do this, but the next day he would come down with someone he wanted on the football team, and that spot would be taken, and she knew it immediately. So I had some difficulty with that. I also had some difficulty with you can't save everybody. And it took me too long to learn that sometimes you're better off letting somebody bounce and they come back faster and you can help them than trying to keep them out of trouble, keep them out of trouble, keep them out of trouble. Okay. Okay. I had several signs around my office, my counseling office. And I didn't have the sign that a lot of people had, what part of no don't you understand? I understood that, but I thought it was too negative. What I did have in there was one of them that said, there ain't no future in the past. And when students would come in and be complaining about what was happening in the classroom, I would say, how can we solve this situation? How can we fix it? Let's not worry about what happened with Mr. Jones last week. How can we do it so you get your assignment in on time, this type of thing. And I would do that with the parents too, when they would come in and there'd be a big conference with the teacher. And boy, they'd come in looking for blood. And I would quickly say, you know, we're not here to beat up Mr. Jones. We're here to solve a problem. Let's see what we can do to solve the problem and work forward on that. I wouldn't be quite that blunt, but that's what I would do. Another sign that I had in there was that dog don't hunt. And this is new to a lot of them. You know, it's an old Texas saying, if your dog isn't a hunting dog, it's not worth anything. That dog don't hunt. And they use it, they extrapolate that to mean, if you're giving me a penny ante excuse, that dog don't hunt. And when I would start getting penny ante excuses from students, I'd point to that. And I'd say, look at that. And I said, it may not be correct grammar, but look, well, what does that mean? So then I'd explain what that means. And we try to work on, okay, let's not work on excuses, let's work on solutions. Okay. Mark Whitelock, my son, born in 1969, has a BA in pastoral ministry and psychology, still lives here in California, has basically dedicated his life and every penny and every extra moment that he has to the church. He'll be on Social Security. Michelle was born a year later, and she got a BA in business at San Diego State, and then went back to Michigan State because she wanted to see some of our relatives back there, and got a BA got a MA in human resources. And she went back to Michigan to do that at Michigan State. My dad had died when she was back there, so when she graduated, she says, I'm gonna go up and be with Grandma for 6 months and then go off on the great job search. Wow. And during that 6 months, she met a guy, got married, and my wife was crying, and I said, look, we just got paid back for what we did to our folks. 2 grandchildren, Jessica, 18, just graduated, and Olivia, 16, a junior. In 1980, from 80 to 95, I invested in a company from scratch called InstaFill Incorporated. It's going to fill in an instant. And I started out, I'll tell you what that's about. I started out as Secretary Treasurer, then I became Vice President, and by the time we sold the company in 1995, I was President of the company. And it's a medical device manufacturing company. When you go in the hospital, they have the bottles that drip the stuff in your arm, whether it's food or drugs of some sort. And they would have a line, the glass bottles with a rubber diaphragm on the top, and they would have a bulk bag of either saline or sugar solution, and the bottles would come with powdered medicine in them, so they didn't have to be refrigerated, and that could be penicillin or streptomycin or whatever. And they would have to take a hypodermic syringe and stick it in the bulk bag and go over and stick it into the bottle that's going to drip in your arm, and then throw the needle away and do it all over again, and that would take 28 seconds. Well, we developed this device that had a filler needle and a vent needle in the same needle, and this was hooked to a hose that went to a bulk bag of saline or dextrose or whatever the doctor ordered up, and that was under a pressure from a blood cuff. And so you'd pump that up, and then you'd line a bunch of these bottles up in a row, and you'd stick it in, open it. In 4 seconds, it would fill, not 28. 4 seconds, it would fill. You'd pull it out, you'd stick it in the next one, you'd pop the cap on this one, you'd pull it out, pop the cap on this one. And so the finance people in the hospital loved it. So we sold that strictly to hospital pharmacies. And that went for from 80 to 95. Then we could see it was going to be obsolete. We had a guy that wanted to come in and buy us out, and so we sold it. It was time to sell. We hadn't moved on technically then, and the technique was going to improve from that point on. Okay, let's see. I had, and I briefly mentioned to you before, a conflict with my principal and my superintendent over the way I thought I should counsel and work with kids, and this thing where they could bring people in at the last minute and bust the spot open, and the principal started playing around with the books and this type of thing, and we conflicted over that. Well, I got busted. He busted me down to a teacher position. I don't mean down negative, but that was his philosophy. So they sent me down to the other high school, and they put me in a classroom. Welcome back, Cotter. Yeah. Remember that? Yeah. So that's the class that they put me in, and they were sure, because they knew I had this business on the side, that I would resign. Well, I didn't resign. My kids, it was a low, there was H, which meant high school. It didn't mean honors. And then there was regular, and then there was enriched. And at the end of the year, my kids didn't beat the enriched kids, but on the state test, they beat the regular kids. So it didn't work. Eventually, the community caught on, and the principal came this close to going to jail, and the superintendent got fired, and I immediately got hired back at Foothill as a counselor.
Karma.
So I had 1 year to go to reach 55, and they said, come on up and be a counselor up here. And I said to the new principal up there, I said, look, I got a deal you can't refuse. I said, I'll come up there for 1 year, then I'll be eligible for retirement, and it'll give you a whole year to find someone that you want. And she said, fine. So I went up there, and in April of that year, she called me in her office. She said, you had talked about retiring. And I said, well, that's what I told you. She says, how are things going here? And I said, I think they're going fine. It's going well with the kids. It's going well with the parents. It's going well with the teachers. She says, fine, why don't you stay? And so I stayed for 6 years instead of 5 and retired in 2000 when I was 61. Okay. Let's see. While I was busted down to teaching, I taught from 83 to 90, and I was the teacher of the year down there, the year 89, 90, and then I went back up to Foothill High School as a counselor in the fall of 90, and then retired from there. Now, Counseling back up at Foothill from 93 to 2000.